Sorry
There
about
we
that.
go.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm happy to be here today. My journey was definitely not a typical one, I would say. I started a long time ago in air traffic. I had a passion and a love for aviation. And so I also wanted to be the administrator of the FAA. That was Jane Garvey at the time. And so I started out, I did my internship with the FAA as well when I was going to school for my undergrad. And then 9/11 happened. And sometimes things happen in your life that change the trajectory that you were planning. And so not only was I always interested in aviation security, the organization that I worked for was transitioned. I volunteered to go down to Washington, D.C. And then thankfully, my bundle of joy number one was brought into the world. So that changed a few things as well. And then I received my master's degree, and then the world was still a crazy, funny place. So I got into computers, which was something I was into when I was but even before I was a teenager. So information assurance is what it was called back then. And so I started learning the world of cyber before it was even called cyber, which was an interesting thing. And then my bundle of joy number two came. So that was another curveball that life threw at me. And I raised my hand a lot. I tended to do things that other folks didn't want to do. So that's how I got into special programs in the intelligence community and risk management framework. I also went to Philips Healthcare for a few years and was their DoD program manager. And then things just kept evolving. I kept raising my hand. For example, I had never had direct reports up until about 5 years ago, and I raised my hand for that again. And here I am today. So I can't believe it's been over 20 years, but I've had a very interesting journey, worked on a lot of different programs and supported things from all different aspects, from our nation's security to the people perspective, which I'm doing now. So I really enjoy that.
I love this. And thank you so much for sharing, the both overarching things that have changed the world as well as some of the small things. I feel like that's something we maybe don't recognize as much is like how many times in your life the world will change or can change, and then also how many times in your life your world changes.
Right.
Either like you said, because of adding to your family or, whether there's overarching like situations happening elsewhere, like I very much appreciate this. Like change is the one constant we can all count on, right?
That's true. Yep, absolutely.
All right. Now to kind of get to the subject matter at hand, I think everybody that's here agrees that it is really important to hire diverse individuals. Now, obviously, one person is not diverse, but to hire people who help fill culture gaps within organizations, people that come from, different walks of life, educational backgrounds, financial background, all kinds of stuff. But we also know that in 2022, over 4 million people voluntarily quit their jobs. So, what do you think people or companies should know about retaining their workforces? Is there anything that people should think about that maybe might not have been true prior to 2022?
What's important to me is to realize that everyone brings something different to the table. Everyone has value. And I try to make sure I include everyone in the activities or the training. I don't look at anything other than qualifications necessarily or interest, right? So if someone raises their hand and says, I'm interested in doing that, then let's figure out a way to get it done. And if there's a specific market that we're not necessarily tapping into that we need, I say, let's go look at it. Let's dive into that and see what we can do to bring things together and close those gaps. So one of the things that we did since 2022 is we've really done a great job, at least in my experience, of wrapping our heads around the hybrid experience. There's a lot to be said for going on site and working, and it's really hard to create relationships virtually through a phone or a webcam. But it's really getting on site and making that difference, and getting people to understand that, and getting the motivation to get them on site is really important still. So we come up with a lot of different activities like that. And I encourage people to get involved in employee resource groups or volunteer. We have technical interest groups. And I encourage them also to get involved in professional associations, for example, Women in Defense, or Women in Cyber. Those are really important things to do to fill your own personal bucket. So figure out what you are passionate about and go with that.
I like this. Okay, let's kind of drill down a little bit. What do you see as the core difference between developing team members versus just retaining them? I feel like a lot of times, when we talk about, a lot of times when we're talking about people leaving organizations, we only look at retention numbers, right? How many were here in this year and how many were here in the following year? But obviously you think that these two things are different. Can you explain how retention is completely different from actually developing your people?
Yes, this is definitely different in my area. This is actually one of my focus areas, I would say, a couple of the focus areas that I have. I call developing team members really upskilling, right? What do you want to learn next? What are you going to work on? What's in cyber? What's your next certification? And so I help people create their individual development plans, their short-term goals, their long-term goals. That's really important. And that's wrapped in with your annual performance goals so that you always have a plan as to what you're doing next. Make sure you have a mentor. What professional associations are you participating in? Which are ERGs? And make it a goal to do that every single year. So that's how you really, develop your business acumen, if you will. So you have a mentor, you're getting out, you're attending a conference, a summit. I give these assignments and tasks or ideas, whatever you want to call them, to people on a daily basis, whether it's an employee or a potential employee or someone that's just reaching out because they're looking for ideas, they're early in career, they're pivoting into cyber, they're getting out of the military. I talk to all sorts of people every day, and this is really important because you are always developing as a person throughout your career. You should want to be. No one wants to really be stale. And so that's the development part, making sure there's money set aside for training. Cyber folks love SANS training, so we make sure we have that. We have the Employee Scholar Program. This is paid tuition for school. And that's really important. That's a great benefit that we have.
Yeah.
So the retention aspect is really taking it to the next level when you see that someone's not happy or when there's performance issues. You really, what I normally do is have a one-on-one conversation, try to peel back the onion, figure out what's not working. Maybe they need a different manager, maybe they're not in the right role. And I help them look for roles within the organization. And that's been very, very helpful to our organization. Sometimes programs come and go, and we need to find places for people as well so they're not misplaced or forgotten about. Sometimes that happens. So a combination of these things, when you talk about retention, that means it's important to get them before they've given their notice as well, right? So that's why I like to have the open door policy, because I want people to know they can reach out to me anytime, call me about their development plans. What are they? Because they should have a manager that supports them. And I encourage people to have a mentor that's not in their direct chain of command, outside of their department even, because that really gives them a totally different perspective. So they're not just head down working on program and forgotten about. And if you don't have a good manager that's going to advocate for you to get that promotion or to get you, working on a different type of program or get into program management or the next certification, then you're going to be forgotten about and you're going to be left behind. So I really, I encourage people to do that recognition of each other and participate. That's really important. I always say, you know what, we rise by lifting others, and I'm trying to teach my daughter to do the same thing. She's 18, and don't be discouraged by someone's lack of enthusiasm for your enthusiasm. So show that grace and acknowledgement and be supportive, and that's been really helpful as well for the retention.
I love this. Now, just a point of curiosity for me, would you say that it's possible to have a good retention rate without professional development or vice versa? Do you think that they really have to go hand in hand to be successful? Because I mean, I know a lot of places kind of just focus on the retention portion, which you're right. Mostly by the time you see people, it's a bit too late, right? A lot of people don't have these conversations. So I love that this is intentional. But do you think it's possible to have good retention without development programs?
Potentially, depending on the market, it's been pretty volatile, and between the job market or the financial market, uh, the state of the nation, there's a lot of different factors, especially since COVID, with the whole change in, work-life balance that really came to fruition. So it's possible some companies have deeper pockets, they can pay more, and that keeps people at companies as well. So it's a variety of different things, but I think it just is really a compliment.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I really, as I was listening to you talk about this, I like that there's kind of a not necessarily dual focus, but like the onus is on the employee, right? Like you because nobody's going to care about your career as much as you do. And that's fine. That's honestly for the best. But I think I like that it's both, something that requires the input and like the initiative of the employee, but I also love that it's supported by processes, by programs. So yeah, you do need that like, hey, I want to go out and do this, but you're not going to be like forging your own course the entire time, right? I think that's really awesome that it's supported, but it's not just one of those things of like, and yeah, we'll move you right on into this area. It's like, no, 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 like, are you interested? Because there's a lot of people that aren't, right? I feel like we've all met people like that. No, no shade, no hate, but like there's always going to be somebody who's like, yeah, this is my job and I'm going to do this until I retire, and that's fine, you
Right.
know? Yeah. Okay, if job seekers are applying to companies, what should they be looking for if they are concerned with what the company's DEIB practice or policies might be? How can employees or sorry, job seekers like, assess this, and what should they be looking for?
It's a great question. I personally think that's something a candidate should ask upfront with the recruiter the very first call. Um, I like people to deal with the questions up front and be transparent. So if this is a concern, you need to address it right away and find out about it. And if you don't get a good response from the recruiter, and then you go to an interview, you ask the question again. And if you still don't get an answer that's appropriate for you, it's probably not going to be a good fit at the end of the day. And that's okay, because you need to be your own advocate and figure out what it is that you're looking for. What are your top priorities? And I always encourage people to do that. Think about what your top three are. Is it the location? Is it the money? Is it the culture?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Are there any questions that employees or sorry, that job seekers should be prepared to ask? I feel like this is something that we talk about a lot is asking the questions that are important to you, listening to the answer, but also listening to the tone of the answer, right? Like if you ask about employee resource groups or business resource groups and they say no, we don't have those. Are they saying it in a way that's like, no, we don't have those, and we'd really rather you move along to another line of questioning? Or are they saying, no, you know what, we don't have those, but if you were to join us, like, is that something you'd be interested in helping with? Is that something that you would be, interested in helping us to start? Like, if there's more interest in this, like, we think that this is something we should do. So truly, like, listen to the answer, because I mean, you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you, right?
Right. That's a great point. And what I encourage people to do is, when I'm interviewing people, for example, I want to see more of their personality to see if they'll blend with the team, not
Mm-hmm.
just ask those technical questions. Because if you can articulate what's on your resume and very fluidly, very candidly respond, but can you make eye contact? Can you have a conversation? Those soft skills are really important, because that will enhance or really demean the culture, because I want to work next to people that are going to smile and laugh with me when I almost fall out of my chair, or when I make a mistake. Anything is going to happen, right? And I think we've seen it all after about 20 years working. And that stuff is really important to me. I want you to be able to laugh with me, laugh at me. And if someone, says something out loud that doesn't make sense, you've got to be able to laugh at that. So if you just have a very dry sense of humor, that doesn't, I just don't feel it. And So I want to know what it is that you do outside of work that's important to you. You know, what are you going to bring? How can we volunteer together outside of work? Or, you know, we just had an event recently with one of the ERGs. I've partnered with them, and it was a vision board event that we created for the employees, and it had such wonderful turnout, and people that I would not have expected to be there were really into it. And we had males and females, and it was just great. It really filled our cups, and we are still talking about it 2 weeks later. So it's awesome. And those things are really important. So when I talk to someone on a regular basis, I want to know what interests them. And if they aren't able to articulate that, then we have a problem right there. And so that is also a lot of what I do is that interview prep with people, because sometimes when they get nervous and I say my brain falls out of my ear, I can actually see it. And so that happens sometimes too. So it's, you know, figuring out what your personality is and what your priorities are.
Well, and I think that you brought up a really good point, right? Is like when you're assessing somebody, you want to see how they're going to fit in with that team. And this is something we focus on a lot, is this idea of not trying to find a culture fit, because that's kind of how you get a very homogenous group, but trying to find that culture gap or the culture add that person's going to bring, right? And you hit on a really interesting note by saying, like, you want someone that's going to be able to laugh with you. You want someone that's going to be able to, make eye contact and have these communications, have a sense of humor, or that kind of thing. And I think this makes a really good point, right? Because what we're talking about isn't necessarily, if you don't make eye contact with me when we're talking, then we can't do this, right? Because like there's, neurodivergent people struggle with this a lot. There's a lot of us that do. But I think it goes to kind of the value structure, right? So when we're talking to companies about these things, they're like, yeah, we want people that share our values. And they're not saying like we want people that are exactly like us. What they're saying is we want people who are going to respect everyone as a baseline. We want people who are going to, be okay with feedback and, learning and growing and doing more and getting better at our jobs. We want people who are going to respect others and their needs for whatever, but also be curious and want to learn more. You know what I mean? So like these are values that really go to the core of what you're looking for when you're trying to find candidates that do not reflect what's already in the room. Candidates who reflect the communities you serve, or the needs of your clients or whatever. I think that's great.
I have always worked in a male-dominated industry, so I see it more as a barrier, but a challenge, right? So it doesn't matter what the diversity factor is. I'll never forget the first day that I started working. I looked around and I was in a building with 300 men, and I was literally one of 3 women. And I was like, this is off a little bit. But you know what? That hasn't changed. But I have a mindset as, we got this. I can tackle it. I can take you all on at once. It's not a big deal. Let's figure it out together, So I think there is always going to be, and hopefully a lot of that going on, rather than people being shy and straying away from those barriers. I want them to be able to pull them down.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, are there any particular challenges or points to be aware of in terms of retaining diverse professionals, especially when it comes to women in tech and cybersecurity? You talked about being the only one in a room. I'm sure you're not the only person in today's session that has encountered that. I've been the only woman in a room a lot of times. What do you think people should be, like employers should be aware of if they are trying to retain people that add diversity to their organization?
The biggest thing that I see is people really need to feel valued. And when they don't feel valued, they start to look elsewhere. And this comes during, performance time when people are going to get raises. It comes uh, times of change when there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And so one of the reasons I saw this particular job that I have now is because it was focused on people. And I had never seen that even at Raytheon in my 15 plus years here. And I said, that sounds like a really interesting thing. And so I'm an employee advocate. I'm a people champion, cheerleader. I get all kinds of wonderful terminology names, but I think just because I put the real side to it and bring it to face value, like what's going on, how can we help? And it's been really helpful. And I don't just let people know that they have opportunities inside. I also let them know the facts are, reality is they're going to leave if they want to leave, if they've already decided that, right? But I let them know they can come back anytime. And I want them to stay connected through LinkedIn or here's my email. And if I'm ever in town or if they're in the area, let's get together and connect, because that's really important. So I think when I mentioned earlier about filling your bucket, those things are really important, and getting the support from your leadership team overall and your peers, not just your leadership team, but you want to make sure that, for example, one of our team members is going down to present at B-Sides in Tampa, and I heard that several members of the team were going to support him. And I said, that is awesome. That's great, because they were being supportive of their team member. And I just said to myself, I really want to work with that team again, because that is a great team just to have that support. And that team right there is a very diverse team, because I know quite a few of them and I interviewed a lot of them. So it's pretty interesting how the dynamics work together, especially when you're in that team environment, which really helps to retain people.
Mhm. No, I think you made a really good point there, which is like, I think it's something we hear a lot, right? People don't necessarily generally leave companies, they leave bad managers. And so I think it is really a good point of saying like, hey, honestly, if I've had a lot of jobs, I've worked a lot of places. If any place that I had worked, whether I left on good terms or not, had said in any way, like, hey, if you're ever looking again, like, let us know. Or if you ever decide you want to come back, let us know. And as you were talking about that, it kind of sparked something for me, which is like, not that no one does it, but it is very uncommon now to hear of somebody who found their first job or their first couple jobs and are still in that role after more than, I would say, honestly, probably 5 or 8 years. And it's probably getting shorter. So do you see that potentially this idea of like boomerang employees could be a trend for the future if this is the attitude that y'all have towards it, right? If you are actively encouraging this, do you think that could be something we see more of in the future, since people don't, retire after 45 years with a gold watch?
Well, the funny thing is at Raytheon, we do have quite a few people. We do have that. We have 40-year parking spots.
I'm
And
sorry.
I know, I can't even imagine it myself. I cannot imagine it. But there are people, and I just talked to someone the other day who was the site executive for Andover, and she started out as an intern. And I meet people and I say, that is awesome. And, the interesting thing is that I've been here a long time, and I have always been very proud of where I work and what I do and the different programs that I've supported. And it creates who you are at the end of the day. But I think that's one of the reasons that, at least where I've worked, and Raytheon has continued to be very successful, because we have had a lot of people go and come back, and they have policies for that, and they support it at the end of I've done it myself. And I joke about it because I went home. I went back home to Raytheon after I left for a while. But sometimes things happen, and things might be out of your controls. We have a lot of folks in the military that end up having to be relocated or something. And sometimes the grass seems a little greener on the other side, and people need to do what's right for them at the time. And that's why it's important to keep that door open and that relationship open, because I can't blame people, and I want them to do what's right for them. And so if you think it's best to go somewhere else at this time, absolutely, I fully support it. We're here. So I've
Like,
seen a lot of different things, and especially at the bigger companies, when there is a lot of people that have been there for a long time, it's quite interesting. But it is nice to see, because it's the old school people. It's I say old school, but I mean that, of course, with all due respect, because it's like going to the Cheers in downtown Boston or something, that you see people that It's like good old home days, and that's always nice to see a friendly face as well.
all right. Okay, the last question I have for you, and I want to make sure we end on time today. How do you suggest people get leadership buy-in for DEIB programs or professional development resources? Tying these things into a business case and making it about the money is very, very common advice here. Not to say that it's not correct either, but what do you think people should know? Are there any tricks you can give people, or things that have worked for you when you were trying to get people on board with this?
As you mentioned, the business case, metrics is always very good data. Data speaks volumes, right? For me personally, I have a very supportive manager. He really does care about people, and he realizes their value. So I think that's awesome. For the larger purpose, the employee morale and the feeling of belonging is extremely important. And so if you document it in your goals and you communicate that with your manager, and if you also expand your role because you want to develop and grow, that's really important too. So I encourage people to raise their hand and let their leadership team know that they want to do something. And usually with the combination of those 3 or 4 things, it's really successful.
Dear Lord, this is my only job and still somehow I forget my mute button. All right. So if people are curious, like if anything that you said today has sparked their interest in Raytheon, we're going to share links in the chat thread about where they can check out Raytheon's company page on powertofly.com, how to, apply to roles, blah, blah, blah. But what do you want people to know if they are interested in Raytheon?
If they are interested in Raytheon, I encourage them to go to rtxcareers.com. Happy to have people connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn. I always repost career fairs at a variety of companies, to be honest, because I talk to so many people. And usually if you search, you will get in touch with a recruiter or someone that works at Raytheon. It's a huge network of people. And that's the best way I would recommend.